When shots first rang out that day 100 years ago, there was no border wall separating Nogales, Sonora in Mexico and Nogales, Arizona in the United States. Men grabbed rifles on both sides and the battle was on. Townspeople running for cover as gunfire blasted across both Nogaleses. Men firing from hilltops on both sides and from windows of many buildings still here today. U.S. soldiers on the Arizona side exchanging gunfire with Mexican soldiers and citizens on the Sonora side. Dozens would die, most of them on the Mexican side. Nogales, Sonora still honoring the dead to this day as heroes of the Battle of August 27, 1918. Or known on the U.S. side as the Battle of Ambos Nogales, or both Nogaleses. The battle would become a significant moment in border history because it would lead to the first permanent border fence between Mexico and the United States. A divide casting a long shadow over once friendlier times. A divide playing out today like a long, bittersweet ballad. What makes the battle so interesting 100 years later is that nobody here can say with certainty just how the battle got started and why, or who's to blame, the U.S. side or the Mexican side. It remains a hot topic of debate among local U.S. historians who spoke with us in Nogales, Arizona, and local Mexican historians giving us their version of events in Nogales, Sonora. Like Pablo Lechuga, who says U.S. soldiers are to blame.
La culpa es los militares estadounidenses que estaban en mucha tensión, tenían mucha tensión nerviosa.
Both sides will agree that in the months leading up to the battle, U.S. soldiers had reason to be tense and nervous. They'd originally been sent to Nogales, Arizona and other posts along the U.S.-Mexico border because the Mexican Revolution was raging at the time just across the border in Mexico. U.S. soldiers were ordered to stop violence in Mexico from spilling over the border. Indeed, Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa and his men had carried out deadly cross-border raids into the United States. Compounding things was the U.S. suspecting Mexico of collaborating with its World War I foe Germany. And why did the U.S. suspect Mexico was involved with Germany? Because the U.S. had an intercepted German telegram known as the Zimmermann telegram from Germany's Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann that sought Mexico's support against the U.S. in World War I. In return, Germany promising Mexico it would win back the huge swath of territory, roughly half of Mexico, that it had lost to the United States during the Mexican War years earlier. So with the possible German-Mexico threat in mind, U.S. soldiers and custom guards on the Arizona side of the border were said to be looking out for German spies or collaborators crossing back and forth here on International Street. Local U.S. historian Andrew Conlog says the spark that set off the Battle of Ambos Nogales that fateful day reportedly came when a young Mexican carpenter attempted to carry a box from the Arizona side of Nogales to the Sonora side.
He actually successfully gets over to the Sonora side with his box, where the American authorities call out and say, hey, stop, we want to see what's in the box. When the Mexican border guards say, no, you're already on the Mexican side, and then the Americans said, no, come over, and they're kind of going back and forth, and then eventually the guards on both sides get into an altercation, shots are fired, and that's kind of how the Battle of Ambos Nogales gets started.
But there was no box, says Nogales, Sonora's town historian and archivist Alberto Suarez Barnett.
No, there was no box.
Or at least he says there's no proof of that leading to the first shots being fired. He says a lot of what's been written on both sides is usually hearsay.
Nobody knows for sure.
On the Nogales, Arizona side, longtime resident and town historian SIGRID MAITREJEAN says what we do know for sure is that what she was told by her mother, who was 14 at the time and 2 blocks away from the battle when it started.
There were bullets flying, but she didn't ever see anything at least that she told us about.
As SIGRID shows me photos from the period, another historian from Nogales, Arizona arrives.
And this is AXEL HOLM, who is actually the person you really ought to be talking to. This is Mike. This is AXEL.
How do you do, Mike?
Nice to meet you.
Well, I expected somebody who was Chinese to have
AXEL HOLM, born and raised in Nogales, Arizona, says some believe the battle that day was a premeditated attack on U.S. soldiers by Mexicans under the guidance of German spies on the Nogales-Sonora side of the border.
The Germans were trying to establish military bases in Mexico. There's even evidence of them planning an invasion.
Though Pablo Lechuga insists there's no proof Germans were ever in Sonora, and he believes it was a U.S. Customs guard who fired the first fatal shot that day, killing a Mexican customs guard at this very spot, he says.
El soldado norteamericano disparó y mató aquí al oficial mexicano.
And then, he says, the U.S. Army crossed into Sonora with guns blazing.
Al rato por allá entró el ejército, empezó a invadir todos estos edificios y de allá de arriba del cerro salieron los mexicanos a combatir a ese ejército invasor.
Historians on both sides do all verify that after several hours of gunfire, a sniper on the U.S. side shot and killed the mayor of Nogales, Sonora, Felix Peñalosa, as he was waving a white flag in an attempt to stop the fighting.
But someone from the American side fired a shot, and it was about right there when he came out and was waving his flag and somebody shot him and he was killed.
The battle that day would last several hours. The number of dead on the Mexican side is said to be some 30 soldiers and as many as 100 civilians. The death toll on the Arizona side, 4 U.S. soldiers and 2 civilians are said to have died. Shortly after the battle, both sides agreed to put up a fence down the middle of International Street. And the rest is history.
The big legacy of the Battle of Ambos Nogales is actually, we're looking at it right now. We're looking at this border wall here. So we were just up there, up on the hill overlooking everything, and now here we are, we're right next to the border wall here. There it is.
A wall, Andrew says, that when it went up all those years ago, effectively cut off entire families from each other on both sides of the border, who've since lost track of each other all across the Ambos borderlands.
I'm kind of a product of the Ambos borderlands. My ancestry originally is Mexican.
Andrew's father, he says, has shown him old photos of a great-great-grandfather, a Mexican, who owned a general store on the Sonora side back in the day.
So if you can imagine, 100 years ago, this wall wasn't even here. It was just the hill and you could just go over either country.
And today, somewhere out there in Sonora are many more relatives Andrew says he'd like to meet someday if the situation between both countries ever improves.
I just think about what an impediment this is to kind of me discovering more about myself. I mean, I could go visit if I wanted to and I could go dig it up, but man, this sure kind of is an intimidating way to convince people maybe to not do that. And we're waiting for a couple of historians over from the other side. Hola! Hola! Hola!
Agreeing to meet Andrew today to discuss the Battle of both Nogaleses are Mexican scholar Dr. Ismael Valencia.
Hola! Hola!
And Delia Piña from the University of Sonora.
¿Quieres que me quede aquí?
Yo no tengo un pasaporte.
No tengo visa. Para acá, ¿verdad? Estoy tramitándolo.
100 años atrás estábamos más cerca.
Sí, muy cerca.
Jump the line?
I don't think so.
Their primary discussion here today focuses on whether German spies or agents really did play a role in the battle that day.
Some American people said that there were like German spies and things. I don't think that's true, and I wondered, do you either?
Mira, con respecto a la presencia de probables agentes alemanes en el caso de asesorar a tropas mexicanas, no hay ninguna evidencia. Se tiene claro el famoso telegrama Zimmermann en el que supuestamente se pretendía apoyar a los ejércitos mexicanos para que tomara parte por el lado de Alemania en lo que era el escenario europeo de la Primera Guerra Mundial. Sin embargo, no hay ninguna evidencia al respecto de que se haya aceptado ni que haya habido agentes.
Es que yo he consultado en periódicos, retazos de textos, en ninguna parte se menciona que haya habido alemanes en ese momento aquí.
Así que hasta pronto.
Dr. Ismail says there is one other lasting legacy of the battle. It's that many Mexicans on the Sonora side to this day, deep down inside, he says, have a us against them mentality when dealing with U.S. citizens.
El símbolo pues, de la batalla tiene que ver con ese proceso de identidad del sonorense, del mexicano, ante la otredad, ante el extraño, en este caso, ante el norteamericano.
Huge shrines to the Mexicans who died in the battle and monuments are everywhere in town. In fact, so cherished and so important are the heroes' memories, Nogales, Sonora's name was officially changed to Heroic Nogales by Mexico's Congress in 1961. Resident Ofelia Bolano says every man, woman, and child in Nogales, Sonora has been raised in school to remember those who died here that day.
Porque defendieron aquí el territorio.
Now, when you compare how the battle is remembered here on the Mexican side to how the battle is remembered on the U.S. side in Nogales, Arizona, surprisingly few local citizens here are aware a battle ever took place. For example, for years, local high school student Lorenzo de la Cruz has walked by two houses here, completely unaware they once housed U.S. Army officers who fought in the Battle of Ambos Nogales. You don't know about the Battle of Ambos Nogales?
No, I don't know.
First time you're hearing about it?
Yeah, I know the first time hearing about it.
They didn't teach you in school?
No.
On the U.S. side?
No.
What did they teach you?
They teach me about math and science and mathematics.
History, maybe?
Well, yeah, history too.
But just not that?
But just not that too, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Andrew Conlog says perhaps more disturbing all these years after the battle is that the killing of Mexicans by U.S. authorities has not stopped.
In terms of the way that history is sort of repeating itself, is that we have this instance of military and law enforcement shooting unarmed civilians as they're crossing.
According to U.S. government records, more than 60 Mexicans, the majority of them unarmed, have been shot in recent years by U.S. border agents along the border, many of them in the act of crossing the border illegally or while attempting to smuggle drugs into the U.S. 22 of them shot dead. Nogales, Arizona historian AXEL HOLM says citizens on both sides still manage to remain cordial with each other most of the time, bound by economic interests today, with $30 billion worth of trade going back and forth by train through both Nogaleses. Though the legacy of the battle, the wall, he says, certainly does little to cultivate real trust among residents here. Nor does he expect that to change anytime soon, he says, particularly under the current U.S. administration.
We're not going to see, because of Trumpism, we're not going to see a change, I think, here.
Throughout history, says Nogales, Sonora's town historian Alberto Suarez, the U.S. government often downplays, he says, the negative impact its policies often have on other countries like Mexico.
Que gana la guerra es el que escribe la historia.
Which means?
The one who wins the war is the one who writes history.
The Battle of Ambos Nogales may have happened a century ago, but a century later, many say the battle along the U.S.-Mexico border, in many ways, continues.
Well, what do we learn from this, or have we learned anything?
To be more careful in the future.
Though Suarez says being careful along the U.S.-Mexico border in and of itself has been a daily battle that's easier said than done in Ambos Nogales.